This past July, I was out camping near my family's farm in western Iowa, along with my girlfriend Alexa, my best friend Jason, and his new girlfriend, Samantha. Samantha actually had never been camping before, let alone more than a mile off the trail in the middle of a forest. She was understandably nervous, but we were watching out for her. We do have to watch out for prairie rattlers, poison ivy, and even mountain lions in this part of the state. We made camp in a clearing on top of a small hill with a few trees, but we were deep in the woods to be sure. We arrived to make camp, eat, drink, and went to bed by midnight. Nobody had any injury besides a few mosquito bites. Everything was going according to plan until suddenly I woke up to the sound of Samantha screaming at the top of her lungs. I just couldn't believe how loud she was screaming. It was actually insane. I woke up, I guess at the same time as Alexa grabbed my light and my Glock and ran out. I told her to stay in our tent just in case. Jason was already trying to comfort Samantha, and she was talking, almost babbling about something huge walking through camp and scratching at the tent and making a terrible sound. I told her it could have been a coyote or even a mountain lion. What little food and trash we did have was outside of the camp area, so that wasn't an issue. But I assured her that I would stay up and light the fire again, that I would take turns with Jason watching the fire because our movement and the fire should scare anything away. This seemed to comfort her, and she actually went to sleep in with Alexa. Jason and I both stayed awake talking quietly, watching the fire and checking around camp for tracks and signs. We couldn't see anything obviously wrong or suspicious. It certainly could have been a mountain lion, and this did have me on edge with the girls there. About 30 minutes had passed and Jason walked just out of the firelight to take a leak. He was off to my left, my tent across the fire in front of me, and Jason's tent behind me. There, off to my empty right, I saw something and heard a large crunch. Jason heard it also and was practically still pulling up his pants running towards the fire. "What the hell was that? That is big," he said. I know, it could be a big cat. Better get your 44 out of your bag too and get that bright tack light," I told him. He returned with those items and we waited to illuminate whichever area we heard more movement from next. Then we heard a crunch and a snap. More movement almost directly behind us. We stood up simultaneously and spun around, turning the brightest light on. For just a second, we saw what almost looked like a gorilla-sized and shaped figure disappear back into the trees. At this point, I'm trying to keep it together and Jason is just frozen. I tell him to snap out of it and that we need to get the fire to grow. Once the fire is larger, we both need to take a position, one in front and one in the back of the tent to protect the girls. We heard this awful grumbling and growling sound for the rest of the night. I have never heard anything like it. And large crunching and snapping sounds continued to emanate from the woods behind Jason's tent and really all around us. Periodically, we would see something move either to our left or right in the clearing just outside the trees. I kept the fire going. I actually had the fire pretty enormous by the end of the night. As soon as the sun started coming up, we packed up. On our way out, we saw large prints in the mud down by a small stream at the base of the hill we were camped on top of. I can't really say anything other than the fact that they basically looked like a huge man's prints. The thing we saw was definitely not a man. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was going to hurt us. I don't know if it was Bigfoot. Frankly, I don't want to know. The way I see it, it's really not relevant because I was thinking it was a mountain lion initially. Those are also dangerous. I won't let this stop me from camping. Sometimes I guess you just hear scary things at night in the woods, because scary things do live in the woods. I guess that's just part of the adventure. I'm a 27-year-old male, and I've lived in the same town pretty much since I could form memories. Until my 25th birthday, I had never been out of the state of Florida, or even further north than the Orlando area. For my birthday, I decided to change that and saved for months to visit some friends I have across the country. I've known them online longer than I've known any of my local friends. The first stop was to visit one of my then best friends, Alice. We don't talk much anymore due to a falling out over her drug-addicted fiancé. But at that point we talked and gamed together for hours each week. She lives in North Carolina, close to a large city but in a rural area on 10 acres of former ranch land. Her and her fiancé lived in a large trailer in the middle of the property. To the north and east were a few acres of forest, to the west was what used to be farmland, and to the south was a long driveway, some landscaping, and the street. Alright, so the plan was for us to camp out the first 3 nights I was in town, and then Alice, Danny, and Alice's friend Kate, who was down for no string stuff while I was in town, were going to stay in a nice hotel in the city the remaining 4 I was there. Danny had prepared for my stay by digging out a massive fire pit and collecting tons of firewood. We dropped by the store and stocked up on beer, camp foods, and bug repellent, with a little side stop to a dealer friend of Kate's that hooked us up with medical-grade pot from out of state. This was a whole new experience to me, being city-born and raised with no previous camp experience, so I was really excited. Even though we were only about 500 feet from their trailer, I felt like I was in the great outdoors. The weather was great, only getting to around 70 in the day and dropping to about 60 at night. With clear skies the whole week I was there, so we didn't bother with tents and just set up with sleeping bags. We roasted bratwurst over the huge bonfire Danny built, drank till we were buzzed, passed around the pipe a bit, and blasted music well into the night while chatting and playing drinking games. When it came time to wind down, Alice and Danny set their bags up on one side of the fire while Kate came over with me. We were both too drunk, baked, and too tired to do much of anything, so we just ended up snuggling until we fell asleep. The next day, Danny and I went out into the woods to a stream that cut through their land and a few of their closest neighbors' land for an afternoon of fishing and small game hunting. We ran into one of the neighbors who was out looking for his dog. Said he hadn't seen her in a few days and was getting worried. We told him we would keep an eye out, and Danny told him not to worry, that if she was in the woods there wasn't any predators out there and he expected her to turn up soon. The neighbor continued on and we kept fishing. Around 5 or so, we turned up with a few fish and 2 rabbits. Alice and Danny got to getting them ready to eat. The rabbit was going to be stew meat, and we were just going to cook the fish right over the fire. The night went much the same as the first, drinking, music, games, and hanging out. Not too late, Alice and Danny said they were going inside for a bit, leaving Kate and I to have some privacy. Just gotta say, sex outdoors by a roaring bonfire under a bright, starry sky for someone used to the apartment life was amazing. Almost worth what happened later. A bit after we finished, Alice and Danny came back out and we all hung out a little longer before planning the next day and then calling it a night. We slept under the stars again and it was as beautiful as the first night. Kate and I slept cuddled with me as the big spoon and slept pretty well considering we were on the ground. I woke up sometime between 2 and 5 in the morning. I can't be sure as my phone had died earlier and was charging inside. I had to piss my brains out but was too tired to walk to the house, so I made my way to the big pile of wood by the fire and stepped to the other side facing the forest. I took what had to be the longest piss of my life and went to zip when I thought I saw something moving in the tree line. Something roughly human-shaped, maybe the size and form of a lanky teenager. It stopped, looked dead at me and just stared at me for what seemed to be forever, but was probably close to 5 or 10 seconds before running off into the forest. I didn't think too much of it at the time. I mean, the closest neighbor had a boy about the same height and build, and I figured maybe he was just checking to see if we were still partying to join us. Thought that I may have scared him, being a 6'2", 240-pound bearded bear of a man. I shrugged it off, went back to Kate, and fell asleep. The next day, we hung out inside a bit because a neighbor was burning trash and the smell was carrying on the wind right towards us. We played Xbox in the living room most of the day, and Alice made that rabbit into a damn good stew. Around 5, we went back out and resumed the bonfire activities. The neighbor and his son came over around 7, bringing beer and a big Tupperware container of homemade jerky. We shot the shit for a while before I remembered the night before, and I apologized to the teen for scaring him off. He was very confused, so I explained myself. He told me he had been up all night playing Halo at home and never left the house. I was surprised, but Kate and Alice said I was probably imagining shit and teased me about being a city boy in the country for the first time. I swore by what I saw, but the neighbor just asked us how hard we had been partying and laughed it off. I just dropped it and went back to the previous discussion and card game we had going. Around midnight, the neighbor and his boy headed out in their truck and we decided to turn in for the night, considering the early check-in time and the long drive for the hotel the next morning. Sometime just before sunrise, I woke up with a very uncomfortable feeling. I have bipolar disorder and anxiety issues, and together they caused me some problems, one of which being really bad nightmares. I passed it off as that and shifted to get up to take a leak, but stopped cold when I felt breath on the back of my neck. I almost passed it off as Kate deciding to snuggle me from behind in my sleep, until I woke up enough to realize that she was right in front of me. She was looking right at me, scared out of her mind, crying. I started to turn my head to see who was behind me, and she repeatedly mouthed no silently. The breathing got heavier and raspier, and I felt weight shift behind me. Kate's eyes followed the movement and froze as it stopped. It felt like forever, whatever was behind me just there and us as still as death. Then Alice's phone went off. A text message. A "I'm too fucking tired" grunt came from her direction, followed by her snores. At the same time, whatever was behind me pushed off the ground hard and went into a full run to the tree line and then into the forest. Kate and I laid there until the sun came up, and she refused to speak a word until then. When she finally spoke, she said that she woke up to take a piss just before I woke and noticed something crouched over us by its shadow. She turned over thinking it was Danny or Alice trying to get one of our lighters, and saw a sickly gray-looking figure that looked like the personification of cancer grin at her. It put its finger over its blistered lips and made a shush sound before grabbing at its crotch and laying down behind me. Fearing for what it might do if she said anything or I turned, she kept quiet and just cried and tried to warn me. We woke up Alice and Danny, who immediately went inside, called the cops, and came out with a shotgun, a rifle, and a pistol. We sat facing the forest with guns ready until an officer came out. He took our statement but didn't seem to believe us. Maybe the beer cans all over, I don't know. We were shaken as all hell, and not too long after he left, we got our shit and got out of there. The rest of the day was spent in the hotel, just trying to get over the incident. I put on my big boy pants and manned up. I had saved a lot for this trip, and I was going to enjoy it. I was out of that area and safe with a gun at hand. The rest of the trip was fantastic. Great food, awesome sights, and a lot of fun outside of the city. I almost forgot about the whole incident and had put it totally out of my mind until I got to the next leg of my vacation. I had just unpacked in my hotel in Utah when I got a call from Alice. The neighbors with the missing dog had found it, dead, along with several other dead dogs, cats, and rodents. During his search of the woods, he came up on a part belonging to a property that hadn't been lived on in years. In this stretch of the woods, he found a crude shack he said reminded him of a hidden moonshine still or meth lab. Inside, he found dead animals, a bunch of old Playboys, an old mildew-stained and moist-looking mattress, a ton of tiny alcohol bottles, fluid-stained women's underwear, and what looked like crack pipes. He reported it to the police immediately, and they sent out a pretty large team to look into it. They caught a man trying to flee from the scene. Apparently crazy, on drugs, or both. When they detained him, he tried to molest the officers, spit at them, yelled unintelligible nonsense, and touched himself in the back of the cop car. The guy was almost exactly what Kate had seen. Dear psychotic, methed out madman, if I ever see you again, you better hope you get me before I get you. Fucking creep. This story takes place down a road near the house I grew up in rural Canada. So my best friend and I grew up together, and we were neighbors from about 6 years old up until I was about 15. Her, my sister, and I would always go for walks down a road near our house when we were younger. She still actually lives at the same house she grew up in, but we moved a long time ago. So one day, while my sister and I were at her house, we decided to go for a walk for old time's sake. We went down the same road as we always did, and it was actually a lot of fun. We all love walking and hiking, so we really enjoyed this. It was Thanksgiving weekend, and the trees looked beautiful with all the fall colors. This particular road had a lot of hills and trees and is very scenic, especially in the fall, but is very isolated with almost no houses and close to nobody ever passing through. As we're walking along the road and we start nearing the bottom of the first huge hill, we see, in the ditch of the road, a freezer. Now, because of the isolated location, there is no guardrail despite there being a massive gully. We're instantly intrigued when we see it and begin nervously laughing and joking that there'll be a body in there. Obviously, we weren't going to leave without looking inside. This was our road after all. We knew this area like our own home. So we all approached this small freezer and noticed that laying beside it is a black garbage bag slightly torn open. We use a stick to tear the bag and peek inside to see a dirty child's booster seat and a single child's shoe. We thought it was strange, but people often dump unwanted garbage down the gullies in the area, so we move on and proceed to open the freezer. As soon as we do, it hits us. This foul and disgusting odor. I have never smelt something so vile. We slam it shut and run away gagging. My sister throws up, and I, seeing that, almost throw up myself. At this point, we are disgusted, but we have to see what smells so bad. My friend stays back to keep a lookout while my sister and I go back to see. This time, we hold our breath and peek inside, and there we see it. A decomposing blob of flesh partially in a black garbage bag. Half of the inside of the freezer was black with flies and covered in brownish blood. We can see some ribs and what appears to be a skull. The flesh is a mix of brown, red, and grayish ooze. We slam the freezer shut, gagging again. We decide to go back to my friend's house to grab some gloves, hoodies, and bandanas to tie around our mouths and noses. We return with her car this time so we can leave quickly if need be. Now, I should mention that there's a house about a kilometer down the road that most people in the area suspect to be a grow-op or meth house, and we were afraid that we stumbled upon their freezer and that maybe they'd see us, hence why we wanted a car to leave in a hurry. So when we return, we leave the car running and proceed with gloves and bandanas covering our faces. We record so we can look back at the video later without having to keep the freezer open for too long. Again, we can make out some ribs and possibly a skull and, of course, the chunk of rotting meat. I'll play one of the videos on screen right now. I'm not able to show the video with the possible ribs and blood everywhere because YouTube will punish me, but I am able to show one of the videos. Suddenly, we hear a vehicle coming down the road and freak out. Not many vehicles drive by this isolated road, so we're instantly suspicious. We run toward our friend's car, but before we can make it, we see a van driving by slowly. As they drive by, we realize it's just a family cruising through, probably sightseeing or something. When they're out of sight, we check out the freezer several more times and finally find what appears to be a deer hoof. My sister gives up and says it's just a deer that someone put in their freezer then either forgot about or their freezer broke. So they decided to dispose of it in the gully due to the smell and not wanting to clean it up. My friend and I aren't so sure. We're convinced someone may have killed someone. A child most likely because of the booster seat and shoe we found earlier. And maybe they threw a deer hoof in there to throw people off. I've heard of some serial killers doing this to evade suspicion and everyone passes it off as a dead animal. Anyway, we phone the police and they tell us they'll send someone to come talk to us so that we can show them where we found it. We wait a couple hours and no one shows. We call the number the dispatcher gave us, which was a non-emergency number, and they tell us they'll send someone the next day. They probably didn't take us too seriously, and seeing as it was Thanksgiving, they probably didn't want to bother sending anyone out. We made sure to tell them that it may just be an animal. I mean, obviously we didn't want to tell them that we 100% found a dead body, but that we would like someone to confirm and to get rid of the freezer. Maybe that's the reason they didn't come. I don't know. Long story short, the police never showed up or even contacted us to ask any questions. When we returned several weeks later, the freezer was gone, as well as the booster seat and child's shoe. Everyone we told laughed it off and said it was a deer and that we were crazy. I'm not so sure. I'm still convinced, to this day, that we found a human body. I live in the only house down a country road. Everything else is pasture land and national forest for several miles. It's about 3 a.m. and my 3 large dogs go absolutely nuts barking, which sends my husband and I flying out of bed to check on our livestock, assuming that coyotes were in the yard. Before we can even get our shoes on, we hear muttering on our front porch. He grabs his rifle and whoever it is starts knocking on the door with no real urgency, but more like a casual visitor. I had my cell phone ready, already dialing the cops, and my husband slid up to the peephole. A woman that looked right around her late 20s or early 30s was standing outside, patiently waiting a few minutes and gently knocking on the door, not fidgeting or nervous and not being aggressive. My husband said, "Ma'am, the cops are on the way. If you need help, they'll be here in just a few minutes and you're welcome to sit on the swing right there and wait on them. But if there's anyone with you, we are armed in here and will not hesitate to shoot if anyone tries getting into this house." He said she kind of smiled, not creepy, but like she was glad her knocking woke someone up. She then said,
"That's okay, sir. I just wanted to let you know the thing in the woods is coming, and he'll be here soon. Good luck."
He said she turned around and walked down the driveway like she hadn't a care in the world. The cops looked all over the place and couldn't find her. It's a 10-minute drive to our driveway from the main road with no houses until you get into town another 20 minutes away. The whole thing freaked me out for weeks. Alright, so that story was posted to Reddit, and soon after, people started coming up with theories as to what could have really been going on. One person commented saying, "Here's my theory, a Bonnie and Clyde type duo. The woman is late 20s to early 30s, which really doesn't paint a very intimidating person to show up at your front door at 3 a.m. The fact that the knocking seems so innocent is just more of a reason to open the door. You think some poor woman needs help, but her boyfriend or partner is hiding away from the people ready to bust in the house the second the door is opened. When you say the cops are on the way, they're obviously not going to stay around. So a bit annoyed, she says something snarky about a thing in the woods to try and freak you out and then goes on her way. This was a really good theory that had a lot of people convinced. Things like this do happen more often than people think, and it is very dangerous and something you should be aware of. The original poster then went on to update the post later on with what was actually happening, saying, "Update, Tuesday a surrounding house from nearby asked us if we had any more issues with late night visitors. We told him we hadn't, and he said a girl matching the description we gave them when we asked if anyone knew her knocked on their door over the weekend. He said it was the same. She very calmly knocked, but this time she said she needed help. He told her he'd get the cops and an ambulance for her, and he heard a male voice say, 'No fucking cops.' The girl started asking for water or a phone or to use the bathroom. Keep in mind this is at 1 or 2 a.m. He kept her talking, and luckily there was a cop super close on the highway this time, because they pulled up and caught them. It was one girl and two guys. They had a car parked down the road a little bit with another girl in the driver's seat. As it turns out, they're wanted for distributing narcotics and selling stolen goods. They were stealing people's medication and who knows what else.